I'm chatting here with Manny Navarro of The Athletic. He covers all of college football, but is extremely close to the Miami program. And we're going to talk a little about this game this weekend. So let's get to it.
Thanks.
Gators versus Hurricanes. This is going to be big, Manny.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get to see these teams play often enough. I know I'm a little older than you, Ali. I've been around this earth 46 years now, and I remember when the Gators and Canes would meet every year, and it ended when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Once the SEC sort of expanded their schedule, but it was such a fun rivalry for a long time. It was a game that I always looked forward to as a kid, and I'm just glad that they're getting to play this year and next.
I have an aunt who is in the Miami Athletic Hall of Fame. She was a swimmer for them. And so I grew up listening to how Florida backed out of this rivalry and it was the best rivalry and it should continue every single year. And so, I am excited that it's back. I'm excited to talk to you about this. Our video is presented by BetUS. So we'll talk more about them in a little bit. But Cam Ward. Okay. So there is a ton of talk about how good he can be. And I do think that he has an extremely high ceiling. And I think he could be really, really productive for the Canes. But game one in the swamp against a rival, I mean, this is probably the toughest conditions he's going to see all season long. And he sees him his first game in a Canes uniform. How do you think that could impact him?
Well, the good news for Cam Ward is that he's played in tough environments before. I would agree with you wholeheartedly if he was a guy, even with all the experience that he has and 40 plus career starts, I'd be a little bit more worried if he'd never played in an environment like the Swamp. But he has. He played at Washington last season. He played at Oregon, and he played well at both of those places. Threw for 438 yards against the Ducks. His team lost by 2 touchdowns, but he was in the game and he performed well. And then Washington, who made it all the way to the national championship game. I mean, they lost that game 24-21, threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think Cam Ward, yes, it's going to be different. He's playing on this side of the country now, not all the way out west. But I think at least he's had some experience in raucous environments. And so for that reason alone, I think he'll be able to handle
I'm just waiting for the Gator fans in our comments to talk about you comparing Washington to Swamp.
it.
One of these things is not like the other. But, the Florida State game was this past weekend, and Georgia Tech seemed to struggle a little bit with the crowd noise on the helmet communications. And
Mhm.
obviously, that was a neutral site game, but there were more Florida State fans there than Georgia Tech fans. And do you think that that is something, it's new to college football this year? You think that's something that he could struggle with?
Yeah, I mean, I think every quarterback and every player who's got one of those communication systems in their helmet could struggle because it's an adjustment, right? Everybody's just used to looking over at the sideline, turning their head, getting the hand signals, the poster boards, all that kind of stuff. Now it's going to be different. He will have that microphone in his helmet for about up until 15 seconds before the play clock. But it's something everybody's going to be dealing with. Everybody's going to be adjusting to. Mario Cristobal did talk about that this week, saying that they're prepared to do it the old school way if there's any sort of communication issues. But I think it will be an adjustment for everybody in college football to just get used to, hearing and having to cup your ears to hear what's going on inside your helmet.
Kind of interested to see how that plays out. Miami upgraded their running back room and their wide receiver room through the portal this year. And obviously, Cam Ward is there. Do you expect them to just be really balanced on offense, or could you see them leaning more on the run or more on the pass?
Yeah, when you look at Miami's play calling last year when they went 7-6, I think they had four more rushing plays the whole season than passing plays. Mario Cristobal likes the 50-50 balance. He wants to have the running game sort of be the strength of this team and then allow guys like Cam Ward, who's got an incredible arm, to hit a few big plays down the field. And he's got three receivers to throw to that had over 800 yards last season. So there's a lot of quality, experienced, proven guys. I don't know if they're NFL guys, all of them, but they're certainly good, solid college football players. And so I think this offense, I expect it to be balanced. I think in this game, the way Florida's going to want to play this, in my opinion, I think Miami's going to try to come out and establish the run and put a little bit of pressure on their offense by playing a little bit of keep away.
Miami's front seven is getting a ton of praise. Is there a name in that group that maybe people aren't talking about enough and you think may end up surprising us?
Yeah, everybody wants to talk about Ruben Bain, right? Because he was the ACC freshman, defensive freshman of the year last year. But the guy to watch out for is Akeem Mesidor. He played. He didn't play much for Miami last year. Only appeared in 2 games, but in 2022 he led them in tackles for loss and sacks. And everything I've been hearing coming out of camp is he's healthy again and he is back to looking like the Mesidor who Miami got. And was really effective for them in Mario Cristobal's first season. So I think he's got a nice running mate, so to speak, next to him. Ruben Payne does on the defensive line, but there's a lot of guys. I think when you look at this Miami team as a whole and you say, what's the strength? I think that the strongest, deepest position on this roster is defensive line. I think a lot of ways, that's going to make them and give them a chance to not only win this game, but potentially win the conference because they've sort of built it the way that it needs to be built at the line of scrimmage.
Um, okay, so let's stay on the defensive side of the ball for a minute and talk about the secondary. How do you think that unit is going to do against a Graham Mertz-led passing attack that really wasn't bad last year?
No, not at all. And I think that's the one area when I look at this game on paper and I say, where does Florida have an advantage? I think this is where they do because Graham Mertz is very, very good at completing passes and not throwing interceptions and making mistakes. And so while Miami is going to try to, bring the pressure and bring him down and create turnovers, I think ultimately the most important facet of this game is going to be how Miami's defensive backs tackle because he's going to get the ball out quickly. He's going to get the ball and he may not be taking very many shots downfield, but it may be just sort of quick 5, 6, 7 yard passes where guys like Trey Wilson and others can catch the ball in space. And then it's up to Miami's young defensive backs to have to make plays. And that's the one area where going into the season, everybody knows that Miami is not as experienced as they were. They lost 2 starting safeties to the NFL. They've lost 2 starting cornerbacks with over 30 career starts to graduation, guys that are now in the NFL as roster fillers. So they're very young in the secondary, and so ultimately that's where I think this game comes down to as far as the Gators. If they're going to have a chance to win this game, they've got to be able to beat Miami's secondary.
Um, do you think that Miami is concerned in any way about Florida's defense? They weren't good last year, but they've
Mm-hmm.
upgraded in a lot of spots. They've brought Ron Roberts in. Do you think there's anything about Florida's defense that's giving pause, or do you think really their biggest, worry really is that Miami secondary? We'll get right back to chatting with Manny, but first, I want to give some love to BetUS. Right now, Miami is a 3-point favorite on BetUS. So there has never been a better time to bet on UF. With the link in my description, you can get a 125% deposit match on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Make sure you're betting on BetUS this season and make some money with me.
No, I think for sure. I think look, Florida's still recruiting SEC caliber defensive linemen and guys in their front seven. I know Pup Howard's a really good player. They added him in the portal at linebacker. I think Miami certainly respects their opponent, right? Florida State, as good as they were last year, struggled against the Gators, and it wasn't like they just ran them off the field. So I think Miami looks at Florida, respects what they've got in their front seven, and says, look, if we're going to run the football, we've got to do our job. We've got to block. We've got to allow our running backs to stay fresh. So I don't think this will just be the Damian Martinez show, as some people suspect. Mark Fletcher's back from his Liz Frank injury. He was becoming a pretty big star for Miami at the end of last season. I think you're going to see a double dose of those 2 guys in the backfield for Miami, and they're going to share the wealth a little bit.
So if Miami wins on Saturday, what went right for the Canes?
I think they didn't turn the ball over, and they tackled well in the secondary. I think those are the 2 primary uh, things that you got to watch out for. Miami's biggest issues last year were turnovers and red zone execution. They just were bad. Tyler Van Dyke had a really rough season. That's why Cam Ward is here. Couldn't really read zone defenses and struggled. But yet, when I look at Miami's season last year, they beat Clemson at home with a true freshman quarterback. Beat them up front physically, and Clemson's supposed to be one of the best teams in the league this season. They were within a touchdown of Florida State, a team that was 13-0, with a true freshman starting in that game as well. So to me, what the strength of this Miami team ultimately is what they've got up front on both lines of this, lines of scrimmage, and they're going to try to win that game that way. But one way you get beat playing that way is by turning the ball over and not tackling well.
So who do you think this game means more for? Which school?
Wow. I don't know that you can really pick one over the other, for being honest. I think it means a lot to both, just from a recruiting and sort of stature perspective, right? Because you got to be able to recruit in your own backyard.
Yeah.
Florida, is coming off a really rough finish to their season. There's a lot of heat on Billy Napier. Mario Cristobal's got 7 years left on his contract. He's playing in an easier conference in the ACC. I think it means more ultimately to Billy Napier because of the fact that he's on the hot seat, so to speak, in Gainesville. But I wouldn't say it doesn't matter to Miami. It certainly matters to Mario Cristobal in Miami because you've been selling this dream of, hey, we're going to be ACC championship contenders. If you come out of the gate and stumble in Gainesville, a game that you're favored to win, going to be a lot of people questioning your leadership.
Do you think that it's interesting that we have this narrative that, Miami could be, in the hunt for an ACC title and Mario Cristobal is this incredible recruiter when in reality, if we look at Mario Cristobal's record and Napier's record, Mario Cristobal has one more win than Billy Napier in the ACC versus the SEC, and we're
Yeah.
talking about, you would think that the seat would be somewhat equally warm, but it doesn't appear to be that way. Why do you think that is?
Two totally different contracts, two totally different hires. Florida is in a much tougher conference and they expect immediate turnaround, right? Billy Napier came over from Louisiana. Um, and I think his contract is much friendlier in terms of terminating than Mario Cristobal's is. He's got 7 years left. Cristobal does on his contract. Napier has 4. So it's just basic math and buyout money, etc. And a lot of Miami's push. Look, let's be honest here. Miami wasn't before NIL came along, they weren't spending a lot of money on recruits and players. They weren't buying guys because they just weren't investing in football the same way some other schools were. Now that NIL is legal, now that you've got a coach in Mario Cristobal who everybody that is funding Miami and Miami's NIL initiative is behind. That's why this change is occurring. If Mario Cristobal isn't part of the equation, in my opinion, I don't think Miami is spending the way that they're spending.
It just seems like then, I guess the standards are different at the two schools or so. I don't know. It's hard to, from the outside, wrap my head around the concept of looking at their records. There's not a whole lot different. I understand totally what you're saying about contract and being looped in longer, but you would think the people doling out the NIL money would have very little patience for anything but championships, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly the case at both schools. And again, I'm not saying that Mario Cristobal is not under pressure to win this game. He is. I think both head coaches certainly are. They haven't won at all in their first 2 seasons. They've, as you said, sub 500, both of them. But I just think the hiring process, the build, the approach to this all, Miami was looking at this as a long term investment. I thought Florida's approach was a little different. I think they were looking for Billy Napier to be able to deliver quickly, and the fact that they've had 2 losing seasons, 3 in a row now, and a head coach whose recruiting class basically fell apart because of a 5-game losing skid. Those aren't the kind of steps forward that you want to see in your head coach, especially in a conference as competitive as the SEC. So I just think that's why the heat is a little hotter on Billy Napier than it is Mario Cristobal, because he has been able to recruit quote unquote top 7 recruiting classes. Billy Napier hasn't.
So if Miami loses this game, how bad is the meltdown for your fan base? I know what it's going to be like for my fan base. How bad is it going to be for your fan base?
Well, I think it depends on how the game plays out because I think Miami fans, while they're hopeful that this is a great season and while they're got their fingers crossed that Mario Cristobal is the right guy, I think they also live in the reality that it's been 20 years since this program has done anything, right? Like they've played for one ACC championship in the 20 years they've been in the ACC. So um, going on the road, playing at Florida, who, let's face it, they are an SEC team. There is talent. It's not like the Gators are terrible. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
if
look at
Miami
what
keeps
was
if
released
Miami
this week saying Florida actually has more talent on the roster than Miami
right,
does.
you
As
could
ranked.
certainly make that argument, but I mean Miami's a 2-point favorite. I think if Miami keeps it close and loses, if they lose the same way Florida State did, for instance, on a last second field goal, or they lose in a way where it's a late game mistake, right? People are going to be disappointed, but I think it's totally different than if they go in there and get blown out. If the Gators beat Miami by 2 or 3 touchdowns and Miami's not even close, then I think there'll be a total meltdown. But I think Miami's fan base is smart enough to realize, look, Mario still has to prove it. He hasn't gotten to that point yet, and this is an opportunity.
Man, I want to meet these rational Miami fans. They certainly post on
Well,
Twitter.
they're not on the internet. They're not on the
No,
internet.
they're absolutely.
I would say these are the people paying the bills, the guys who actually invest in the change at Miami, not the people who run their mouth. Because there's a lot of those.
There is all fan bases have that. Do you have a pick or a score prediction in this game?
I do. I think Miami's going to win, and I've said this by 2 scores because I do think Miami is fundamentally stronger up front. But I think it's going to be a game in the fourth quarter where Miami's up by a score and they kind of add one on late to just sort of add a little bit of insurance. But I think this is like a 34-20, 30-20 type game where the Hurricanes prove that they just are better than Florida right now, and I think they are. I think right side of the offensive line for Florida is sketchy. I think there's some guys on their defense that still have to prove to me that they can be effective in terms of stopping the run and getting after the quarterback. So I give Miami the edge going in on paper, but we'll see what happens Saturday.
Well, it's going to be a good one. Manny, tell everybody where they can follow your work or find more of what you're going to put out this week.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Manny_Navarro, and you can read all of my work at The Athletic. I've also got a podcast, the Wide Right Podcast. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you download your podcasts.
All right. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much, and enjoy Saturday.
I will.